Well, I'm not in the workshop tonight. I've got something here I thought I'd share. See if any of you are interested. I hadn't come across these before. These are newsletters the Land-Rover Service Department put out from Solihull for many years actually. I've got one here from June 1961 and another from January 1972. And they were used to communicate changes in parts and service procedures and so on. They make for interesting reading. I came across them while talking on some forums. I'm currently investigating a leaking swivel hub on my near side, and it's not the seal. The seal and swivel bearing housing are both fine, and when I watch where the oil is coming from, I see it's coming from between the bottom of the swivel housing and the steering arm. And so I went looking into the size of studs and what O-ring should be on that lower swivel pin and so on and so on, and have actually found there are two types of studs. One is a locating type of stud, and I know that I didn't understand that when I rebuilt that swivel hub 3 years ago, and one of these service newsletters has actually proved useful. So I'll just share some of the entries on here to give an example of the kind of thing that these service newsletters used to contain. I'm wondering if you can find these all collected together in a printed version. That would be interesting. Let me know if you know anything about that. So in June 1961, we've got one here about the engine oil level dipstick, for example, on a 2¼ litre petrol engine. Introduction of engine oil level dipstick with 3 marks: high level, low level and minimum level. And the remarks sections are interesting because they give some justification for why the change was made. And in this case, when using the Land Rover under normal circumstances, the oil level should not be allowed to fall below the minimum level mark, that is, the lower line on the dipstick. However, when using the Land Rover in circumstances which involve it being used at steep angles, the oil should not be allowed to fall below the intermediate mark, that is, the low level. This will obviate any danger of oil pump starvation when the vehicle is facing downhill at a steep angle. So sometime around June 1961, another mark was introduced on the dipstick, and that was a higher minimum oil level to keep in your engine if you were using it at steep angles, which might well just have meant Yorkshire at the time. Anyway, exhaust manifold here, item 56, diameter of 4 holes in end branches of manifold increased from 3/8 to 1/2 inch to rectify possible tendency to crack due to thermal expansion. So I like to see the reasons why a change was made. And in this case, the remarks explain future supplies of exhaust manifold. Such a part number will be to the latest spec. When fitting these manifolds to earlier engines, longer studs and the part number should be used in the 4 end positions, together with plain washers. So I like that too, how to retrofit some of these newer spec parts to older parts. Got an entry here about steering levers and ball joints. In 1961, in the Series 2, we had an introduction of steering ball joints fitted in the non-pendant position, that is, with the ball joints above the steering lever. And then you get a diagram. Probably a lot of us are familiar with this difference between 2 and 2As. In that, with the early type, steering levers fitted on top of the swivel housings, and the steering lever then kind of went forward and down, and the ball joints were fixed below that lever, like in that diagram. Then with the later type, like on my 1969 2A, the steering levers were fitted to the bottom of the swivel housings, and the ball joints came in and were fixed to the top of that swivel pin steering lever. That's what my 2A looks like. And then there are comments here on interchangeability, that the axles are completely interchangeable in light of this change. What's interesting to me with my leaking hub is here regarding these studs. The swivel pin and steering levers are not interchangeable as individual items. They can, however, be fitted in pairs, provided either the swivel pin housing complete is changed for the latest type, or studs are fitted in the bottom position of the existing swivel pin housing. And here it says for your 2 front hubs, you will want 6 of one type of stud and 2 of the other, which suggests you have 1 different stud type in each 4 on each swivel pin steering arm. Now, I wasn't aware of that at the time, and I remember changing studs because I had some difficulty with 1 or 2. They might have been damaged. I might have damaged them. Now, I don't know what type of stud went back in. The studs changed size at some point, but you can't really get that wrong. I think it's the difference between 3/8 and 7/16. You know, it wouldn't do up correctly in the swivel housing. So the size will be right, but I might not have used the locating type of stud correctly. I'll cover that in another video. It's most important the latest type steering levers are not fitted to an earlier type housing in the lower position with the existing bolts. Studs detailed above include the special fitting studs. They must be fitted. This prevents any tendency for movement between lever and housing, which could give rise to premature breakage of the bolts and the possibility of serious damage. So then we get to understand that these locating type studs are used to make sure that even once the swivel pin steering arm is actually done up to torque, that you don't get movement through the steering linkages, which could cause damage to the threads of those studs. Because one is locating, it actually passes past the threaded part and into the swivel housing and reduces that kind of movement. But I will talk about that more in another video. Other bits here on clutch adjustment, windscreen washer kits, thermostats, type of thermostats. Service film strip, I thought was very interesting. Film strip is now available covering the dismantling and reassembling of the 2¼ litre petrol engine. Below is the revised list of film strips covering the Land Rover. I'd love to find those film strips for transfer box and main gearbox dismantling and reassembling. There are some very good videos by some YouTubers, of course, but it would be nice for nostalgia to see these original service department film strips, I think. Does anyone know where we can find those? And there's one here from January 1972. It starts talking about the Series 2A and 3. And again, there's something here mentioning swivel pins, and it talks about the introduction of an improved quality steel 7/16 BSF nut fixing the steering lever to the swivel pin housing. So they're the nuts on those lower studs, and they're not changing size. They've changed to 7/16 long before 1972, but they're introducing an improved quality steel in those nuts. The information detailed in this item will be incorporated in the next available transparency. The part number is for these new improved quality steel nuts. They give the new part number, they say what it supersedes, and they say why they've introduced it is to prevent damage to the threads when tightening and to prevent any possibility of the nuts becoming loose when the vehicle is continually used under arduous conditions. Tighten the latest nut to a torque of 35 pound-foot. Interchangeability is unaffected. The latest type nut will be supplied for all service requirements when stocks of the earlier nut are exhausted. So then we can read entries like this and we can consider if those, what type of material are we ordering replacement nuts for those studs, if that's what we're doing, and is it up to this change in spec mentioned in 1972, because this will have been done for a good reason based on feedback of use in arduous conditions. So it just makes you think twice about what parts you're ordering and what grade of steel you're using. There's one here about the steering column on the Land Rover Series 3. Owing to supply difficulties, steering column assemblies with a shorter outer column are being fitted as a temporary measure to new Land Rover Series 3 models. A shorter outer column, 2.8mm shorter. So it has a spacer inserted between the lower end of the column and the steering box. These columns can be identified by a dab of yellow paint on the underside of the collar located at the top of the column. When fitting an outer column, this part number, supplied by our parts department as service replacements which does not have the yellow paint identification mark, the spacer previously provided must be removed to ensure the correct pressure exerted on the spring washer which pressurises the upper bearing on the column. So you've all been there. There's a part on your Land Rover that's not shown in the parts book. There's a dab of yellow paint. You don't know what it means. These things are documented somewhere in these service newsletters. And in cases like this, it's the difference between the correct pressure on an upper steering bearing. It can be fairly safety critical stuff. I'm not saying you need to find it all and make sure everything's in order, but it makes for interesting reading, and some of it could be very relevant to you and your Land Rover. So yeah, look them up. They're online in PDF. A friend of mine on some forums pointed me at these ones when we were talking about those swivel pin studs. If anyone knows where you can get lots of them or where they're collected into physical print, let me know. I've found reading these ones to be quite interesting. See you soon.